Hello everyone, my name is Newbury, and today I will be telling you all about Cleopatra VII and how modernity has altered one of Egypt's most infamous pharaohs. So, women throughout ancient history have been portrayed by those who write it as the damsel in distress, the snake, the jealous, enraged, and as the seductress. It has not been until recently that we have come to understand the contributions that many women brought to society and how important those roles have been. However, it is the women of non-European descent whom history treats the most unkindly. And yet, there is one woman who has managed to weave herself through the times regardless of her death in 30 BCE. Cleopatra VII, the last true pharaoh of ancient Egypt, was known for her intellect, wit, and her involvement, both romantically and politically, with Julius Caesar and Mark Antony of Rome. Cleopatra has had many iterations over the centuries since her death, but her character is most commonly perpetuated by William Shakespeare's Antony and Cleopatra. This personification of Cleopatra VII has managed to pass into modernity and inspire fascination that transcends factual evidence. I define modernity as the quality or condition of being modern, or a modern way of thinking or working. And that will be the definition I use going forward. My research examines how modernity has shaped our view of Cleopatra VII and how this can affect what we do know going forward with future research. Today, when we think of Cleopatra VII, we might think of a woman who seduced her way into power. But why is this theory of conniving slut more interesting than the fact that Cleopatra VII was highly intelligent and was hell-bent on claiming the Mediterranean for her own? Though my research cannot speak for Cleopatra VII, as she has no surviving text of her own, I posit that her reputation needs a reevaluation. So, before going forward, I wanted to introduce some background knowledge that some of you may or may not know. Cleopatra was born in 69 BCE to the ruling family, the Ptolemies, who inherited Egypt upon Alexander the Great's death in 323 BCE. They were Greek, but they followed the customs of Egyptian royalty, which meant that they married their siblings. Cleopatra herself was probably still very Greek by this time, as they either married other Greeks or their siblings. Eventually, Cleopatra decided that she wanted sole rule of Egypt for herself, and so she murdered her siblings one by one. And this also marks the arrival of Julius Caesar. He was there for other reasons, but eventually she convinced Caesar to help her gain sole rule over Egypt, and then eventually they entered into a sexual relationship until his death. After Caesar's death, she eventually entered into a romantic relationship with Mark Antony, and together they attempted to take over most of the Mediterranean. Both of them were seen as a threat by Octavian, and he planned an attack against Egypt, more specifically just against Cleopatra and her family. And in 30 BCE, Cleopatra killed herself. So, how has Cleopatra's image changed since then? Well, most of what we know about Cleopatra actually comes from fiction and from what we are told by Roman historians, who did not have the highest opinion of Cleopatra. They acknowledged her wit and intellect, but like most of Rome, they saw her as a threat to the Roman Empire and thought she needed taken down a notch. Octavian was very threatened by Cleopatra, more specifically because she and Caesar had a son cesarean. That is up for debate, but it's highly unlikely that Caesarion was anyone else's child. He was unclaimed and therefore illegitimate in Rome's eyes because Caesar didn't specifically claim him as his son, but everybody knew, and Octavian himself felt threatened by that. And so there was a lot of propaganda during this time against Cleopatra, and specifically this anti-Egyptianness movement started. But in terms of Cleopatra, her character became basically the model for what a woman, and specifically a good Roman woman, should not be. Basically, you should not be headstrong, you should not be pursuing other interests outside of the home. Basically, everything that Cleopatra was a reminder to both men and women of Rome that you do not want to be her person, you do not want to be Cleopatra, and you do not want to be involved with a Cleopatra. Otherwise, your social standing, your whole entire life could fall into ruin. But, as I said, fiction has really altered the way that we see Cleopatra. And most influential of that is Shakespeare. Shakespeare wrote Antony and Cleopatra. She's portrayed as kind of a villain, but also the tragic heroine. And I think most of us are also very, very familiar with the 1963 Cleopatra film in which Elizabeth Taylor stars in the titular role. She's kind of the first face we think of when Cleopatra comes to mind. All of this kind of... Shakespeare is the reason why we think Cleopatra killed herself with an asp, although Stacy Schiff and other historians argue that that's unlikely, as an asp's poison is both very slow and very painful. And since Cleopatra herself was an avid poison tester, as in she tested poisons on criminals and prisoners, it's highly unlikely that she would have chosen something so painful. It would have been dramatic, but for the series of events that happened on the day of her death, she probably would have wanted it over and done with before Octavian arrived, and drawing it out wouldn't have been very effective. And so, while at the time her character was tarnished by this fascination with maybe the more seductive qualities, and also of the power that she held, today it's more of an Orientalist view, and the father of Orientalism, Edward Said, he defines it as Orientalism can be discussed and analyzed as the corporate institution of dealing with the Orient, dealing with it by making statements about it, authorizing views of it, describing it, by teaching it, settling it, ruling over it. In short, Orientalism as a Western style for dominating, restructuring, and having authority over the Orient. So Cleopatra is one of those characters that's kind of larger than life. But it's all of these fictional takes and the portrayal of her, namely as a white woman, as seen here on the screen by several of these painters of the late 1800s. She's sexualized, she's white, and some can argue, oh, because she's white, is it really Orientalism? But like, that's kind of part of Orientalism is taking something that is a certain way, or that we, at least in the case of Cleopatra, we are not 100% sure what her skin color was, but taking that and making it something exotic by making her this this figure from Egypt, and then taking her and making her this exotic figure, but turning her into more of a Western woman is a bit problematic. Going forward in research, due to the lack of primary sources, as in zero, and the reliance on secondary sources by Roman historians, who were men, going forward is going to be very difficult. Her character has been mythologized since her death, and with this mythology surrounding her, she's become the object of fascination to many, including Plutarch, who was born 76 years after her death. He collected basically every propaganda piece he could get his hands on, and he influenced Shakespeare and Dante, and most of our pieces that we have on her today are because of Plutarch. But all of that propaganda is really thanks to Octavian, because as hard as he tried to get rid of Cleopatra, he had to keep some of her story, otherwise his recordings of heroic deeds of himself wouldn't exist either. So, a delicate balance. Joyce Tildesley, an Egyptologist, says of Cleopatra VII's treatment after her death, Cleopatra, stripped of any political validity, was to be remembered as that immoral foreign woman. Almost overnight she became the most frightening of Roman stereotypes, an unnatural female. And this is really important, especially for the time, because her image, as I said before, was used to kind of keep other women in line, but specifically make sure that another Cleopatra never happened. There's been a newly announced remake of the 1963 biopic film, which has made other whitewashing claims come up again. For the sake of my research, I would reiterate again that Cleopatra was Greek and neither a white woman. It was probably unlikely that she was darker skinned, at least for the area. And at the time, Egypt was also a melting pot, so it gets really, really complicated. The mythos surrounding her was used to defame her, but I would argue that has backfired. She's kind of transcended any defamation, and I think that adds to our fascination. Going forward with research, I would remind people that you must be aware of the propaganda during her life and after her death, and also the characterization she has received in fiction, and how that has affected research going forward. Because of all of that, most historians and Egyptologists have a hands-off approach to Cleopatra, and they just won't touch her because of it. But despite all of that, Cleopatra VII will continue to fascinate the world, as she has done since her death. Thank you. I hope you have a great day.